Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very special webinar. We're really thrilled to have Betty Wiley with us today to present her photography and her workflow for creating very stunning HDR landscapes. I want to go over a couple of ground rules before we get started. We have a large number of attendees on this webinar, so we won't be able to take audio questions. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions panel in GoToWebinar. We'll be taking breaks, certain periods during the presentation, where I'll read out the questions to Betty and try answers. We'll also be collecting all the questions, and I'll try to collate those and present them to Betty after the webinar to get answers to some of the more extensive questions that you may have. We will be sharing some show specials with you for our HDR software, as well as hardware product from one of our hardware partners called Promote Systems. These are the show specials that we'll be presenting at Photo Plus East in New York later this week. So I'll have info on that at the end of the webinar, and we'll also provide you those discount codes with the follow-up email. We are recording the webinar, and we will make that available for you to view after the event as well, if for some reason you're not able to attend the whole event today, or if you arrive late. So we'll have the webinar available online for you to view at your convenience. So let's get started. I'm a very big fan of Betty's work ever since a colleague of mine shared some of her images with me. She has a beautiful aesthetic view of the world and is able to capture some amazing landscapes, particularly in areas with high contrast scenes. And for this, she uses HDR technology in order to capture all of the dynamic range of the scene using multiple exposure brackets, and then using tools like our HDR Expose 3 software to tone map that to really produce some natural looking results. The idea here is that she is recreating the scene the way that she saw that at the time she was out shooting. Betty's an award winning freelance photographer who resides in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. She's originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, and has lived in the Northeast for over 35 years. She leads photography and post processing workshops out of her studio in Cape Cod, and is well known for her skill in the darkroom as well. She's received many accolades for her workshops, and her images frequently appear in various publications, including the Cape Cod Magazine, Chatham Magazine, South Shore Living, just to name a few. While she specializes in nature and landscape photography, she also operates a small portrait studio in her home. She shoots mostly with Canon gear, however, has also recently discovered the new Fuji mirrorless cameras, and she'll talk about that in the presentation today. Her digital toolkit includes Unified Colors HDR Expose and HDR Express software, as well as Photoshop, Lightroom, and a large number of third-party plugins. Betty travels extensively around the world shooting photos and has recently visited Cuba in January this year, where she describes the photography opportunity there as being out of this world. Added that Cuba is HDR Nirvana, and she'll be sharing some of the photos from that trip as well. For more of her work, please visit her website at www.avagracestudio. That's AVAGRACE studio.com. With that, I'd like to welcome Betty to the webinar, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow, John, thanks for such a wonderful introduction. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my scratchy voice. I'm just getting over a cold on my end, so I'll try and keep the coughing at a minimum. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who logged in to watch this webinar today, and I would particularly like to thank John and Unified Software for inviting me to speak to you about my HDR workflow and processing techniques. Just a little bit more about myself. My interest in photography has gone back really for as long as I can remember, and I've always had a camera in my hands. My uncle actually was a professional photographer, and my mother had a keen interest in photography as well. And I've really been lucky. All my life I've lived in areas where there have been great photography locations nearby. Yes, I am originally from Las Vegas, and yes, people really do live there. Um, and I had the Valley of Fire in Zion and the Grand Canyon all within driving distance while living in Las Vegas. So I had some great places to visit. But I've also lived in California, Japan, Florida, Texas, and as John mentioned, I now call Cape Cod my home. And I have to tell you, if you like lighthouses, quaint harbors, fishing boats, Beautiful marshes. This is definitely the place for you. It's truly a beautiful place, particularly at this time of the year. We actually have our own autumn here when the marshes turn a beautiful color of gold. But I can assure you, it is as different from Las Vegas as you can possibly get. Fishing is a way of life for many here on Cape Cod. And some of my favorite subjects, as you will soon see, are the interesting fishing trawlers and docks, which are really great for HDR photography. Because I tend to shy away from the garish, unrealistic look that many of the HDR plugins generally have, when I discovered Unified Color and their software, which has a unique algorithm which really renders color better than anything I've ever seen, I was really hooked. And I particularly like the fact that the software doesn't generate ugly halos in the images. So I'm actually going to take you on an HDR journey of sorts. We'll visit Cape Cod, Wyoming, Maine, and even Cuba. And I'll talk a little bit about my images and give you some insight as to how I sized up and photographed the scenes. And I'll also take you through my workflow, because I know that's why we're here today. Starting at first with the raw capture and then bringing images into Expose, where the merging to HDR happens and we do the tone mapping. From there, I'll go into Photoshop and I'll use some of my standard editing techniques, which I'll show you, and then I polish up the images with a number of my favorite plugins. But one thing I do want to stress is that processing my images using Expose is really just the starting point. It's just the beginning. I use a lot of tools at my disposal just to achieve the look I'm after, and we'll go through those in the processing session of this webinar. So first I should tell you, as John mentioned, I'm a Canon gal. I own the Canon 5D Mark III, which is a fabulous camera, and I recently purchased a Canon 1DX for sports and wildlife in action. I have to say that that camera is truly amazing. The focusing system really needs to be experienced to be believed. I've never ever seen anything like it. And I also own a Fuji X-E1 mirrorless camera. Recently, I've become a huge fan of the Fuji mirrorless cameras. As I'm getting older, I'm finding that carrying heavy gear is getting harder, and I love the fact that I can pretty much carry everything I need in a small size messenger style bag. Image quality from these cameras is just stunning, and I love the fact that I can actually hand hold the camera at very slow shutter speeds. I've been hand holding at times at like a 15th of a second. It's really amazing. I can bracket the camera for HDR exposures. I can do 3 bracketed exposures. Of course, I would like 5, and shout out to Fuji. Are you listening? But I really do think that these small mirrorless cameras are going to play a larger role in photography for pros and amateurs alike. I do have a number of Fuji lenses, which I've listed here. I'm really hooked on this mirrorless technology, as you can see. And of course, my Canon gear, landscape gear, is listed here. Of course, I have long lenses, which I use for my wildlife photography, but my landscape gear primarily consists of my 17 to 40 wide-angle Canon lens. And then I have a 24 to 105 lens, which is really my walk-around lens that I have on my camera most of the time. And then I also have a 70 to 200 lens. And while I have both the 2.8 and f4 lenses, I've been using the f4 a lot, simply again because I'm getting less fond of carrying heavy gear around. I am a big fan of really right stuff gear. I recently purchased their tripod. It's a tremendous tripod. And I have their ball head and panning clamp. I have a number of flashes because I do portrait work. And filters I use from time to time. However, to be honest, for most of my HDR images, I generally don't use filters. Once in a while, I might use a Very ND to slow down the shutter speed to get a long exposure effect. But for the most part, on HDR shots, I don't use filters a whole lot. And then, of course, a cable release, which I think is essential to getting a really crisp, sharp image when you're on a tripod, just to eliminate any potential camera shake by pressing the shutter. So I'll move on to the software, and as John mentioned, of course, I like to own the latest camera gear, and I also like to own the latest software. So I use Lightroom 5 and CS6. Actually, I just recently migrated over to the cloud, which has worked really, really well. And I'm a huge fan. Anybody that knows me, and I've actually taught workshops in using the Nick Google it's now Google Plugin Suites. I'm a big fan of their Viveza and Color Effects Pro plugins. I've recently discovered another one that I really like, and it's called Perfectly Clear by Athentech, and it does a great job of cutting through haze or smoke or fog. It's just a great plugin. And I'm also a big fan of the Topaz suite, principally Adjust and Clarity. I'm going to show you a little trick with Clarity for skies. I really like what the Clarity plugin does with respect to bringing out detail and texture in a sky. I also use alien skin exposure and snap art from time to time to create an artistic kind of look, and then the On1 suite. And oh, John, I'm sorry, I think something is missing. Of course, as John mentioned, I'm a huge fan of Unified Colors Expose 3. I really do like the way it handles color. Again, I'm not a big fan of the bright garish colors and the real grunge look. I really prefer a much more natural look to my landscapes. And one of the things I really do like about Expose, and I'll demonstrate this shortly, is I really appreciate the fact that it really aligns images very well. I've had a number of shots which I've taken handheld or even on a tripod where I've had some movement, and Expose does a beautiful job of aligning the images for me. And again, I don't experience any halos when I bring them into the darkroom. So with that, I'm actually going to bring up a couple of my images, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I shot them and a little bit about how I sized up the scene. So I'm going to logically start with one of my favorite images from Cape Cod, which of course, as I mentioned, is where I live. This is an image that was taken right after sunrise, early in the morning, in a location in Provincetown. Provincetown is located on the very tip of Cape Cod. Great place to photograph in general, but the dock there, the fishing pier, it's a working fishing pier. So as a result, there are a lot of fishing trawlers, interesting boats, just a lot of detail shots to be had at this particular location. This particular morning was quite stunning because we had had a storm overnight, and when I got up that morning to go out and photograph, the skies were just beginning to clear at the horizon. I still had that beautiful dramatic sky with a lot of color and detail. So of course, that's really kind of what drew me to the scene, besides the interesting fishing trawlers. One thing about photographing boats, though, that you need to keep in mind for HDR images is that they do move. So I took 3 bracketed shots here. I was on a tripod, but again, keeping in mind that boats, even though you don't think they're moving, they do move. So when I brought them into the darkroom, I did notice that the images didn't align perfectly. But again, Expose did a great job of handling that and aligning the images for me. I also wanted to mention that one of the things I need to keep in mind, I do keep in mind when photographing boats for HDR anytime, is that my slowest shutter speed needs to be at a minimum to where I can hopefully stop whatever movement there might be so I get a sharp shot. So while these images were sharp, there was still a little bit of movement between the 3 bracketed images that I took. But again, Expose handled that really well. Just another tip for photographing boats. I usually like to photograph them in the morning. Not as much wind in the morning, and you get better reflections as a result. And again, there's less movement of the boats. So I took this shot on a tripod, as I mentioned, f11, using my 70 to 200 millimeter lens. And I chose f11 because I wanted enough depth of field to really get the front and back of the boats in focus. So the next shot is actually again in Provincetown, and there's this saying when you're out photographing is always look behind you. So it's funny, I was busy photographing the trawlers, and all of a sudden I turned around and I saw this beautiful golden light on the skyline. This is the skyline of Provincetown, and that tall structure you see in the back is the Pilgrim Monument. So I turned around and I saw this dramatic sky, this dark, stormy sky that was starting to clear, but this beautiful golden light on the boats. So of course, if I hadn't turned around, I would have seen it when it was too late. So I took again 3 bracketed shots, really for the same reason as for the trawlers. I just wanted to be very mindful of the fact that my slow shutter speed needed to be sufficient enough to stop whatever potential movement there might be with the boats rocking around. It was quite windy that morning, so there was a little bit of chop to the water. So next stop is Cuba, and I could go on and on about Cuba for hours. It's simply a phenomenal place to visit. When I went to Cuba, I should say I went for the photography, but it really was so much more than the photography. It was just a wonderful cultural experience. But the photography there is just absolutely out of this world. And I urge you, if you ever have a chance to visit Cuba, you really should take the opportunity while it's still Cuba. Um, there are lots of old cars, and they're everywhere. Everywhere you look are the old cars and just decaying buildings, and the people are interesting. It's a photographer's paradise. Of course, there's a saying, again, in photography that when it's red, you photograph it. So we were always on the lookout for red cars and red bikes and red doorways. But I particularly love the scene, and this is probably one of my favorite images from Cuba. I love the colors. I love the red car, of course. It was a great car, and for the most part, they're in amazingly good shape over there. But what really stood out for me is that the car was isolated on the street. It wasn't a real busy street with a lot of cars and just clutter. But I love the colors of the walls, the primary colors of the walls behind the car. Really, I think, complement the car very nicely. So again, this is one of my favorite shots from Cuba, and I took 3 shots. And one of the things I wanted to mention with this particular shot is that while it was in the morning, it was still pretty early. There were quite a few people on the streets, and they were moving in and out of the scene. And I was a little bit concerned about that as I was shooting. So when I brought this image into Expose, it did a great job of aligning the image and eliminating some of the movement of the people in and out of the scene.
Betty,
So I was really pleased.
I know you'll
Mm.
probably cover this when we do the demo portion, but can you tell us like how many stops? In this case, you said you did 3 exposures.
Yeah,
Um, what was the EV bracket level?
I believe it was -2, 0, and +2. That's generally what I use when I'm photographing an HDR scene. I generally like to have 2 stops apart. I have to go back and look at the XF data on this image to be sure, but that's generally how I set up my HDR shots.
And that'll
And
vary too.
actually, yes, and actually a little tip, and I believe I was actually hand holding this shot now that I think about it. And one of the things I want to mention, just a little tip for hand holding, of course, you're going to have better results if you use a wide angle lens. But also, just a little trick, I set the timer on my camera. So I bracket my shots. I'll do, usually just 3 images if I'm hand holding. But I set the timer on my camera, the 2-second timer. So when I depress the shutter, the shots are taken in rapid succession, and it further reduces the chance that you might have some movement in between images. I also try and brace myself either on a pole or a wall that's nearby, because I'm not a real steady shooter. But just a little tip that will result in a higher keeper rate if you're hand holding your HDR images. So
So
from Cuba,
that'll vary depending on whether you're shooting from a tripod or, in this case, handheld, trying to
exactly.
keep it
Yep,
still.
exactly,
And
exactly.
you
Usually when I'm on a tripod, I'm usually using a cable release often, or I will set my timer if I don't have my cable release handy.
and are you
But
using
particularly,
the auto bracket feature on the
yes, I
camera?
am. Most of the time I am. Again, I'm shooting in aperture priority for HDR. I don't want my aperture to change, so I'm using aperture priority most of the time for my HDR images. And, depending on the scene, I'll take anywhere from 3 to 5. I've taken as many as 7 and 9 images, but generally 3 to 5. And usually for 3 images, I'm taking them two stops apart. So from here, we're going to move over to Maine, and those of you on the eastern seaboard will certainly recognize this location. It's a favorite spot for photographers. This is Portland Head Light in Cape Elizabeth. It's right outside of Portland, hence the name, and it's a very popular spot. It's great both at sunrise and sunset, but a great time to photograph this location if you ever make a visit to this area is actually when it's high tide. The basin, as a result, fills with water, and you get a lot more water and wave action. One of the things I liked about this scene when I visited this location a couple months ago, I really like the foreground. I like the way the pattern and lines in the rock lead you into the lighthouse. And I was really fortunate. This was actually taken in the afternoon, but I had some great skies that particular day. I was on a tripod for this shot, and I was actually using a Stingray 2:8 neutral grad filter, so I really wanted to slow down the motion of the water and kind of get that dreamy effect with respect to the clouds. And I shouldn't actually say this. I actually did climb over the fence to get this shot. This is another iconic scene, as many of you may recognize, is what's referred to as Moulton's Barn in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's a favorite place of mine. Photography there is just fabulous. This was actually taken in the fall a couple years ago, and it's funny because when you go there, we had gotten up at sunrise. A little funny story to tell you about this particular image. Gotten up at sunrise, actually before sunrise. We got at this location at dark because we wanted to, of course, photograph this barn in early morning light, right as the sun was coming up. And actually, not really to our surprise, we had been warned about this. Of course, there were a horde of photographers there, such that we couldn't even find a place to put our tripod. So we just thought, well, we'll go back next day. So we went to the next day we went to our sunrise location and then got to this spot a little bit later in the morning. And as we were driving there, we were musing that, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had some buffalo in the shot? Because buffalo are seen quite frequently in this area. Well, when we pulled up, there the buffalo were. And I think in our excitement, or my excitement anyway, I didn't take up my tripod. And I was also a little concerned because buffalo, particularly during the time of the rut, which is in the fall, can be a bit dangerous. So I was hand-holding this shot and not setting up for HDR. So I took a number of images, and I was actually exposing for the highlights, just to give you a little information in terms of how I photograph this scene. I generally do expose for the highlights. I usually try and push my histogram as far to the right as I can without getting blinkies. I make sure that feature is turned on my camera. So I expose for the highlights, making sure that I don't have any blown out areas. So when I brought this image into the darkroom, I thought, gee, I wish I had set this up as an HDR image and taken bracketed shots. And I noticed that the shadow detail in the side of the mountain was actually, it was a bit dark. So I had lost some of the details. So this is actually a single image that I took into Expose. I brought it into HDR and did the tone mapping from a single shot and exposed it. I think a marvelous job of bringing out the detail in the side of the mountain and in the trees where I had some deep shadows also.
Yeah, that's really a beautiful shot. And if it looks familiar to anyone on the webinar, it's because we're running it as the featured banner shot on our website.
Well, it is one of my favorite shots, I have to say, from Jackson Hole. In fact, I just recently went there this past May, and of course I went to this location again. I never tire of this spot. And it was a great morning because we had some beautiful clouds over the mountains, and then, like I said, the bison were a real bonus. So I'm going to actually move back to Cape Cod, and this is another favorite location of mine back on the Cape. This location is in Chatham. It's Stage Harbor Light, and as you can see from by the absence of the light on top, it's a decommissioned lighthouse. But one of the things I really love about this location is that at this time of year, as the sun starts to go down, is just dipping down below the horizon, it casts this beautiful glow in the windows. You have to stand at a particular angle, kind of know where to stand, but it almost makes it look like the building's on fire. That's not Photoshop. That's a real effect. So I always head over there at this time of year and photograph this location. This was actually, I was on a tripod for this. It was getting very dark. The sun was just about to go down and the sky was very dark, as you can see. But I took this as a 5-shot HDR image because I had a lot of tonality in the scene. The foreground foliage was very dark. Again, it was getting really dark fast. I had kind of the medium tones, mid-range tones in the dirt and the ground, and then of course the bright light being reflected from the windows and the light of the lighthouse. So this was actually 5 shots, again on a tripod, and I brought this into Expose, and really not a whole lot of processing was done to this outside of Expose and maybe a little bit in Photoshop. So at this point, John, I think I'll move into the processing demonstration and walk through a few of the images that I showed you today. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, and I should mention to everyone that generally my workflow consists of working from Lightroom. I usually bring my images into Lightroom and then into Photoshop and do whatever I need to do. But in the interest of time, I actually preloaded the images that I'm working on right into a folder that I have on my computer, just again to save time. So I just launched Expose, and you'll see this dialog box come up. And because I'm going to be creating and merging a new HDR image, you'll see you have this option here to select for that. So I'm simply going to click on Create, Merge a New HDR Image, and it brings up this box. And by default, it actually brings up the last images I was working on, which in this case it was the car from Cuba. So all I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to go over to where it says Choose and just navigate to where my trawler images are. That's the first one I'm going to work on. So I'll just navigate over to the folder where those files are.
And it's important to also point out here on this step that you're selecting the folder, not the individual images. That's why the individual images are grayed out in this view. But when you select the folder, then that displays the thumbnails there and arranges them together to be grouped.
Yeah, good point. Yep. So you can see it brings up the three images, the ones of the trawlers. And if you were navigating normally to a folder, you probably see a lot more images from your shoot. In this case, as I mentioned before, I simply preloaded the images I was going to work on just to save time. And you'll notice that they're arranged horizontally, and this is really, they're grouped according to a sequence. I shot these three images, in succession, one after the other. So these three images pop up in this horizontal line. So all I'm going to do at this point, and you can see I shoot in RAW. I always shoot in RAW, or I should say 99% of the time I shoot in RAW. I'm just going to select these three images.
And those were two-stop increments, right? So
yes,
-2, 0, and +2.
So the first thing I'm going to do is, of course, my source filter is already set to RAW, but you can see here you could elect to select for JPEG or TIFF images, depending on how you shoot. So in this case, these were RAW images, so that's my source filter reflects that. And over here, and this is actually important, I'm going to select Auto for Merge, Align, and Deghost. You'll see it right here. Again, Expose does a fabulous job of lining images if they're slightly out of alignment. And I know, because I brought this image and looked at it carefully, that even though it looks like they're perfectly aligned, they're not. There was just a bit of movement of the boats rocking back and forth. They're sharp, but again, they weren't in perfect alignment. So for that reason, I'm not going to check Merge Static Photos. That option really, and John, feel free to jump in here. That option is actually when you're on a tripod, you don't really have any movement.
Yeah, the merge static photos option is really there for both static cameras and static scenes. So if you're doing an interior architectural shot where you have furniture that isn't moving and a house that isn't moving and your camera is locked down on a tripod, if you use, that's a shortcut. The merge static photos images option will give you the smoothest possible tonal transition. And in this case, as you mentioned before, you have two things going on. Well, three things. First of all, you said your camera was on a tripod, so that was stable. But you have boats with all this delicate rigging and everything that are on water that are moving, even regardless how fast you're able to take these exposure brackets. The water is going to move, or the boats are going to move on the water. Plus, you also have a flag that's blowing in the wind in one of those shots too. So these are all elements that will cause ghost artifacts when you try to merge them. So in using the auto setting here and selecting your keyframe, the software is automatically going to line up all that, the boat rigging and the flag and eliminate the ghost. So this is I'm glad you picked this example because it's a great example of this functionality.
Exactly. And so I'm just going to hit merge here, and I really want to show you how well these images are lined up
We
in
had we
Expose.
had one more question that's not related to it was just on your shooting technique, um, and the question is, do you adjust for rule of thirds, plumb and level in post, or do you do it when you're framing up the scene?
I try and do it, of course, I try and get it as right in camera as I possibly can. So I try and do it when I'm framing up the scene. But of course, if you're hand holding, you're in a hurry, it's not always possible to get it exactly right.
Good.
So here we're in the tone mapping portion, and you can see the image and how it's been brought in. And I'm just going to actually zoom in because I want everybody to see how crisp the detail is and how perfectly the mass on these trawlers are aligned. So if I just scroll in, it really gives you a good idea. And if I move around a little bit, you can see that Expose has done a perfect job of aligning these masks, which I can assure you when I brought this image into the images
That
into
was a
production.
stuffed seagull up there too, right? So
It was,
that
yes.
wouldn't move.
No, but you know what? It's funny because he's in exactly the same spot in other shots too. He was there for a long time. So down below, you will see that you have a number of presets. So if you scroll across, you can choose anything from that kind of heavy grunge look, which I generally don't prefer, to the optimal preset, which I generally prefer, to midtones. So I'm actually going to choose the midtones. I think it does a little better job at handling the midtones in this image, and it gives me a starting point closer to really what I'm after. So I'm going to start there. And one of the things I always take a look at is kind of what my histogram looks like. And my histogram looks pretty good. This gray square that you will see in the upper right corner, and again, John, feel free to step in with the technical details, really represents what you can see in your computer monitor.
Yeah, the
So
light gray
really,
box is what
these
we
are,
call the display zone. So anything that's in that is what you can see. You're doing or you're doing all of your editing here on the full 32-bit per color high dynamic range image, which is in its nature too large to display on a computer screen. So we have the HDR histogram there, so that you can get a reference uh, for what's actually being displayed on the screen. So sometimes you'll have areas that are either too dark or too light. So they might look like the highlights are blown out, but if you look at the histogram, you can actually see on the right side, outside of that light gray box, that there would be information there that you could recover through tone mapping. In this case, it looks like you've held the highlights pretty well, and then there's just a tail of the shadow information that's to the left of the
yeah,
display zone.
right in
And
here. And that's right, yeah.
if you click on the little S button there on the histogram, that'll throw up a mask that would show you the area that's too dark, that the detail is
Yeah,
clicked
you
on
can
there.
see the mask as John mentioned displayed here.
Right.
I have a little bit of a delay on my end with my computer.
Yeah.
It slows down a little bit on these webinars. So to John's point, as a result, I'm actually looking at the controls I have here, and I could adjust the gamma, but the midtones look pretty good. The gamma is, many of you may be aware, actually really just works on, or is just for the midtones. But what I'm going to go for is actually I'm going to move the shadow slider a bit to the right. I want to open up those shadows a little bit more. It may take a minute before you actually see this on my screen because I do have a little bit of a delay. My computer slows down with these webinars, so you can't immediately see it. Here, I think you can see it now, but it does a good job of opening up the shadows a little bit more, and you can see the change over to the histogram up on top, how it's moved it. It shifted it over to the right. So I'm just going to scroll down. I have a number of other things I could still do to this image. I could boost the detail a little bit, which I think I'm going to do. And I should say something about the images. I generally do prefer a more natural look, but some scenes, especially if there's a lot of texture involved, a lot of times I do like to bring out that texture. So in a shot like this where these trawlers have really interesting rust and textures going on, I might boost the detail a little bit more than I would for, say, a landscape shot. So I'm just going to boost the detail a little bit and scroll down. Probably won't do anything with the tone curve, but something I do want to mention that I do really like in Expose is that I can do dodging and burning right here in the software. And I might actually do some additional dodging along those pilings. So I just select dodge, and I'm actually going to select to show my brush mask, and make sure I'm feathering my brush and bringing up the exposure a bit, increasing the size. And now I'm just going to kind of brush over these pilings a little bit to bring out a little bit more of the detail and shadow just right in there. That's kind of what I was looking for, just to bring up a little bit more of the detail. So I can scroll down. I could add a little bit of warmth to the image. I might do that just a tad bit, just nudge it up a little bit. Again, a soft touch I think here is all that's necessary. And I could actually even do a little bit more. I can actually go in and increase the saturation, or I can actually individually go in and adjust my saturation channels. So for instance here, there was a bit of red in the sky that isn't really being brought out in this image. I can increase my red slider individually. It will also bring out the nice red in the flag. And I may bump up the green slider a bit, again bringing out the green in the fishing net. So at this point, I think we're in pretty good shape to do the finishing touches. So I'm simply going to hit save, and then I'll give my file a name, and it'll save it back to the folder that I was working in. Now I've already pre-saved this image, so I'm just going to actually close. Actually, I didn't need to do that. Excuse me. So now we're going to go into Photoshop, which is really where I do the finishing touches. I'm working in the Creative Cloud. You'll see it looks just like Photoshop CS6. I really like the cloud. Like I said, I really enjoy having the latest and greatest software. So I'm going to select my TIFF file, the trawlers. It's been saved as a TIFF file. So in a second here, it'll bring it up. And one of the first things I think I'm going to do, and this is something I almost always do in Photoshop with 90% of the shots that I do, is I like to do a curves adjustment. I like to make, there's a little curves adjustment you can do to really kind of make the image, gives a little bit more contrast. I like to say it gives it that kind of pop. So I'm going to select curves, and one of the things I do is I just move my slider in just to the point where it meets the histogram on the right, and I'm going to do the same thing on the left for the shadows. And you can see immediately what a difference that makes to the image. It just kind of gives it that, like I said, pop. So if I turn that off, you can see the image before I made that curves adjustment. And then if I click it, you can see the difference that that makes. Big difference. So the next thing I'm actually going to do is I actually want to bring out some of the detail in the sky. And one of my favorite plugins, and I kind of discovered this by accident, is Topaz Clarity. There's a preset in there called Clouds, and I just love what it does with skies. So actually, I'm going to actually create a merge stamp layer. It's actually a new starting point because Topaz won't work on adjustment layer like it should, so I created a merge stamp layer. And now I'm simply going to go up to my filter menu and go down to my Topaz Labs Clarity plugin and bring that up. And again, I know in advance of kind of what I want this sky to look like, and I know what this preset's going to do. So it's just generating the preview now. So here it is. So I have two I can choose from. I have Clouds 1, and here it is here, and I have Clouds 2. And I'm kind of liking the way Clouds 2 looks. So that's the one I'm going to go with. And as with most of the plugins, you can do some further adjustments.
And you're also able to brush it in and a little more selectively, and then adjust the
I do that
opacity
usually in Nick. Yeah, with this one I wouldn't, but for instance here, one of the things I'm going to do is actually go into the hue saturation slider because I really want to bring up a little bit more of the red in the clouds, just a little bit more. So I'm just going to move that over a little bit just to bring up a little bit more of that color. But that's looking pretty good, but I really like the detail that it's brought to the sky. It's just given it a little bit more detail than what was there before. I can actually even bring up the contrast a little bit, but I'm really fond of this plugin for skies. So at this point, I'm just going to hit OK and bring it back to Photoshop. So it's just doing its thing. So we'll go back into Photoshop. So here we are. So I'm just actually going to unclick this layer so you can kind of see the before. It's subtle, but it's just enough to give a little bit more definition and color to the sky, and I really do like that look in terms of what it's done to the sky. So the next thing I'm going to do, and again, this was kind of like my vision that morning and kind of what I remember seeing is, again, the clouds were starting to lift from the horizon as the sun was coming up, and there was this beautiful warm glow at the horizon line. I'm not really seeing that a whole lot here in this image, and I really want to bring that out. So a couple of things I can do. I can actually, and I am going to actually go into the Google plugin suite and bring up a filter called Brilliance and Warmth. So I'm just going to select for that. It'll bring it up. I have it saved as in my favorites. And I'm going to navigate over to the Brilliance and Warmth. And one of the things I really do like about a lot of these plugins is that you can brush on the effects selectively if you're working in layers in Photoshop. So that's really what I want to do in this case. Again, I have a number of presets here. I'm going to select the one that's closer to kind of what I'm after. In this case, it's the increased saturation. I'm not really keen on what it's done to the sky. It's just maybe saturated the sky a little bit too much, and it's brought in a little bit too much warmth to the trawlers. But what I'm looking for is this golden light at the horizon line. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just actually going to increase the warmth just a tad bit. But rather than hit OK, because if I hit OK, of course, it would apply this as a global change. I'm simply going to select Brush. And watch what this does. I'm going to just brush this effect on right over the horizon. And my brush isn't working with my bracket keys. It's a little bit of a memory problem on my computer. So I'm just going to brush in that warm light just right over the horizon line. Because really, that's what I saw that morning, was this warm light at the horizon line. So it's just kind of a nice trick to bring in a little bit more color where the image isn't really showing much. So again, before and then after, just bringing in that nice warm light. The other thing I'm actually going to do before we finish this image off is I want to bring out a little bit more of the detail selectively, and that's really the key, selectively in these trawlers. So I'm going to reach for one of my other favorite filters in Color Effects Pro 4. Again, this is Nick's Google Color Effects Pro 4. And it's Detail Extractor. And it can be a bit strong sometimes, but again, I usually elect to brush on the effect. So I'm going to go into Detail Extractor, look at the different presets. This one, of course, is a bit too strong. It's taking the sky way over what I want it to be. So I'll probably go for the default, maybe just move it up the slider just a little bit more, just to give a little bit more detail. But again, I don't want to do this to the whole image. So once again, I'm just going to select Brush and then just brush it on selectively along the sides of the trawler to bring out that interesting rust texture, maybe on the fishing net. Let's move this out of the way. So you can see here how it's just going to bring out this detail, this great detail that's in these trawlers. These trawlers have such great detail. They always have these great rusting hulls and these interesting, colorful fishing nets. I love photographing them. Maybe just a little bit on the side of the dock there, but that's pretty close to what I'm looking for. Again, you'll see I just brushed it on selectively. So at this point, I'm just going to hit Apply, and I just want to show you kind of like just the difference. It just, again, just brings out that detail where I want it to be brought out, which again is on the trawlers. So at this point, I'm pretty close to being done. The only other thing I can that I would do, and I do this again with most of my images, is a lot of times I add a soft vignette. I can do this in Nik a number of ways I can do it. I can, of course, do it in Photoshop. I can choose darken, light, and center, going back to the plugin. And that's what I'll do in this case. It'll give a darker look to the sky, give a little bit more drama to the sky, which is really what I'm looking for. The only problem here is that it's made the right-hand corner a bit too dark, but I can fix that. I'll just place my center over the trawlers, which is really where the focal point is for this shot. And because I don't want that darkening at the lower right-hand corner, I can just drop a negative control point over that and fix that. So at this point, I'll hit OK, and we're done. I have to say that many of these plugins really speed up your workflow. Things that used to take so long in Photoshop can be done really quickly with the use of a lot of these plugins, which is why I use them so often. So again, I'm just going to unclick all these layers, and we'll just quickly show you what I've done. This is our starting point. This is what we started with after we did the merging the HDR and tone mapping in Expose. I did a curves adjustment, just bringing my sliders in on the right and left. And then I added a bit of topaz clarity to bring out the detail in the sky, brilliance and warmth on the horizon, detail extractor to bring out a bit of the detail in the colors, and then polished, I like to call it, polished the image off with a bit of darkening around the edges. So there you have it.
I think that's a great example of, the workflow from start to finish, Betty. And again, you're starting, the question about the workflow often comes up, and a lot of people who are, especially using Lightroom, we don't have time to go into the Lightroom workflow. I have tutorial videos on our website that discuss that, in greater detail. But you want to start photographically, as you've shown. You always want to start with the biggest nut first, and then work your way down. And I think this was a great example. You started with the raw files and merged those into an HDR image, and then did the basic tone mapping on the full 32-bit color data and contrast brightness adjustments, and then save that out as a 16-bit TIFF, I believe, that you opened into Photoshop, and then worked your way further down with the various plugins to tweak and polish and cut the final image. So I think that was a great example of that. Let's take a look at another image.